curious and the beautiful, and taking them back usually to display in museums or in private homes. The next period, from sometime, I'd say approximately in the 1920s up through the 1950s into the 60s, they're really still with us. These are still things we do. Period of systematic field work and classification of cultural materials that are found in the archaeological record, and the putting those in order in time and space arrangements in chronologies. Now that's something we still depend on. It's a very framework of the field. We try to do more now.
Archaeological ceramics in this area are dated, cross-dated, with structures that have been absolutely dated by dendrochronology, that is, tree ring dating. Ceramics are found with structures that are dated in this way, and they can be dated through constant association of finding a certain style of pottery with these tree ring dated sites. This has gone on for many, many years. This kind of chronology building has been refined quite well for the Mesa Verde area. Oh yeah, this is that rhyolite. It's that igneous rock, probably from Ute Mountain. Yeah, cool. Fantastic. It's not finished, but it sure is sturdy. What do you have, John? Oh, you have part of a bowl, Mancus. That's a Pueblo II type. And you have maybe Mancus McElmo pottery. This is a little bit later. That's super, and this is a rim sherd. That tells us a lot.
The big breakthrough, I think, that came in the 60s was moving away from a cautious position that there are things that archaeology can't ever understand to a brave position, the brave postulate that potentially any kind of cultural or social behavior can be represented in the archaeological record, that it's up to us to figure out how it's represented and what its traces are, what its clues might be. So that opened up a whole new world of inquiry.
The Crow Canyon Center for Southwestern Archaeology near Cortez, Colorado, is a leader in creating new approaches to understanding prehistoric Anasazi culture.
Man has lived in this area for perhaps 12,000 years. 99% of that time did not write things down. The only way we can understand anything about those people is by excavating the only documents available, which are the archaeological remains. All of the digging that's been done for 100 years here hasn't been designed in a way to tell the total story of the people. Wouldn't it be interesting to develop at Crow Canyon Center a kind of approach that says, one day we in Colorado want to write a book which speaks of human history, not of European American history, but of human history over 12,000 years, so that the first 99% of the human career is told with some degree of detail comparable to the last 1% or 100 years of the human career.
Sand Canyon Pueblo, where the Crow Canyon Center is conducting research, is a massive stone complex. The Pueblo contains 350 rooms, towers, and ceremonial chambers, or kivas. It covers an area larger than 3 city blocks and is enclosed within a wall more than a third of a mile long. Sand Canyon Pueblo was built in the 13th century and used until the abandonment of the region as a whole.
Well, Sand Canyon has a central role in our research design for what we're trying to accomplish here in the Mesa Verde region, in that it seems to represent something that isn't represented in Mesa Verde National Park or the work that's been done in that area. And if it is what we think it is, it's going to completely change our reconstruction of what was going on in the late Pueblo times in this area. I mean, dramatically change it. Sand Canyon Pueblo seems to be not an occupied Pueblo. In other words, not a domestic site where people were living on a day-to-day basis. It seems to be a focus of ritual activity, ceremonial activity, in some kind of a organized manner. So it's looking like a ritual center. Now, what this ritual center served as far as the population goes is very, very hard to deal with right now. If it turns out that Sand Canyon Pueblo, and probably a number of other Pueblos in this area, are indeed ritual centers, I think it's going to change dramatically our understanding of the culture and the society And it's going to reinforce what has been lacking in archaeology for a long time, our interpretation based on the spiritual aspects of the society, as opposed to small groups living an autonomous existence with occasional contacts with other peoples, other groups nearby. We're looking at some kind of a centralized authority, whether it's a loosely knit authority or a highly authoritarian system, hierarchy. It's hard to say at the moment.
I think that the responses we're seeing at Sand Canyon, that is the intensification of ritual, the building of centers, of a center that may in fact be a ritual center for a region the size of which we don't know yet, is rather similar to some of the things that went on in Dolores. That is, instead of turning to a maximum leader, instead of elevating someone to the role of organizer, czar, you know, that sort of thing, instead of elaborating a formal political structure, they instead elaborated their ritual organization.
So far, the first year's excavation, indeed a small sample of the site, has supported the idea and the contention that this is a ceremonial center and not a domestic structure. It also seems to have been intentionally ritually destroyed, which is again a different sort of thing than just simply saying, well, it's time to move, the place isn't any good anymore, let's go down the road, down the canyon a couple miles and set up shop down there. When you do that, you have the option to come back and get things that you've left and make many trips. However, if you ritually destroy a site, intending never to come back and nobody else ever to use it, then you get a different kind of a situation. And that seems to be what we're finding here at Sand Canyon now. The evidence for ritual destruction so far at this site has come from the two kivas that we've actually started excavations in, neither of which have been completed at the moment. Both of these kivas have been intentionally burned at one time, along with the ritual, what I'm calling ritual destruction of the ritual structures, the kivas. We're finding that the rooms are being abandoned with everything basically intact, in place. Again, a very, very unusual situation. The rooms are being left with the roofs on, just left. And we now have a storage room with all the pots and everything that were being stored, the metates, everything in the rooms, just there. We have two rooms that had people just left on the floor. No attempt to bury them, just left there. Again, it looks like, let's get out of here. And where we go, we want to make sure that nobody else messes around with this, at least our ritual structures. So it's going to change, I think, a lot of our interpretation of especially the end of the Anasazi in this area from simply an economic problem. We had a drought, the people moved. The economic stuff, information is certainly relevant, but that's not the reason people abandoned an area. I mean, unless the environment got so bad there was no existence possible. What happened, evidently, is that the environment got so bad that they couldn't exist here with their system. And it had happened several times, and so that was the point of time when they abandoned. And when they went, they blew everything off.
For a very long time, archaeology was site-specific, digging up things to put in museum exhibits. It didn't say much about people, about ways of life, about how people made their way on the land over thousands of years. The regional perspective is the only way you can accomplish that. And you can accomplish it because people live in a region, and they live regionally. It'd be like digging up a hole in downtown Denver and expecting to understand the life of the people of Denver by doing that. You couldn't do it. You have to dig a hole in 28 places in Denver to accomplish that. So here also on the Colorado Plateau. To understand life of the Anasazi people, you've got to look at all aspects of that life. So it's part of a general movement to understand the fabric of people's lives on the landscape, in their way they got their raw materials, they conducted their rituals, they carried out their daily family life. And to do that, you've got to dig at all locations of their life.
You recognize that if you want to understand their economy, for example, in say a typical southwestern culture, you need not only to look at the habitation site where they largely were processing resources that they brought back from the landscape, but you need to go out on the landscape and look at those tiny little sites where perhaps they were actually acquiring those resources and maybe doing some of the initial processing out there. So the whole focus has really changed to one that emphasizes variability and the full range of expression of behavior in the archaeological record, rather than just finding an inventory of the kinds of things they were doing.
This is obviously a very large site that we've come across here. What I'd like us to do now is spread out and try to find the perimeters of this site by where the density of artifacts starts to fall off. I also want to go out and find how many mounds that we're looking at and try to estimate kiva depressions and where the trash mound will be here. So why don't we spread out now with our flags and set up our tripod and compass at the highest point of this mound. I think this looks most central to get a view of the entire region here, and we'll start looking around and see what we can find. Archaeological survey is the act of walking on the landscape to discover where sites are located in relationship to each other and relationship to the land surface on which they are located. It is primarily done to discover relationships about sites and their environment, and in this case, where we're working here at Sand Canyon, it is going to help us understand where the people lived and how they related to this big site, Sand Canyon Pueblo. Survey is the only mechanism, really, that addresses the question of regional interactions. Without survey, you wouldn't know where sites were located. You wouldn't know how they related to soils, distance to water, distance to other sites, and in fact their configuration on the landscape, their distance between each other, the sizes of sites. All these things give us information about the nature of sites, habitation, where people lived, and how they interacted with one another. Survey in this area is going to provide us potentially with the answer to the question, is Sand Canyon Pueblo a ritual center? The basic premise is that Sand Canyon is a ritual center because it doesn't have the normal kinds of architecture and trash deposits and configuration that a normal habitation site of this time period would have. If it is indeed a ritual center, then the question is, where are the people who are building Sand Canyon? Where are they living? And who are the people that built it, maintained it, and continuously used it? Are they all the same people? If we are able to understand more about spatial organization and the way people relate to their world and to each other, at least as we see it from archaeological survey in this area, we will get much closer to understanding what was really going on in the mind of the Anasazi. We may not ever understand exactly what went on in one person's head, but we'll certainly understand more about group activity and perhaps much more about a culture that we only are able to dimly see through a reflection of their descendants in the Pueblo peoples of today. This is not to say that they are the Anasazi and everything that they do is going to give us those clues to the past, but it gives us more information from which to work on.
Chuck Adams is the only archaeologist ever allowed to excavate within an inhabited Hopi village.
The approach that we're looking at studying with the Crow Canyon project at Sand Canyon is looking at Sand Canyon as a ceremonial center and as a focus of a belief system that a large area of people, a regional area, probably were involved in. And this belief system, we think, is a keystone to really understanding how cultures functioned, how they were able to cope with their systems, how they were able to persevere. We see that a good analogy with this among the Hopi, who live in a very harsh environment, who have rainfall less than we have in this area, and they are able to persevere because of their religious systems.
The Crow Canyon Center is unusual not only for its innovative research design, but for its educational programs. Students and adults are trained to assist archaeologists at research sites. They gain further insights into Anasazi life by learning to make replicas of tools and pottery and to make fires using prehistoric techniques and materials. For the students working on research teams, hands-on work with ceramic material, stone materials, making arrow points, atlatls, dealing with the technologies that the ancient people dealt with, provides them with an understanding of the things they're finding on the sites.
Hi.
Hi, how are you?
Just fine, you?
Are the things still open that we can see at this hour?
Bruins Road is open to be driven until sunset. That's about 9 o'clock.
I think it's very, very clear, just looking at the numbers of people that visit this area every year, that people are extremely interested in this particular culture. This, as well as many other cultures in the past. That interest, I think, is legitimate, just for your general development, an individual's general personal development, on the same level that an interest in art might be. I think that's as legitimate, and probably all the legitimacy that this whole exercise needs is that people care, people are interested. Not just people here, but people from all over the world.
Research into the Anasazi has only begun to give us insights into their values, their ideologies, their sense of this place where they lived for 1,500 years. When we know more about how the Anasazi viewed their world, we shall have gained a greater understanding as well of how to conduct our own lives within this, their ancient homeland.
When we talk about ideology or symbolic or behavioral activity, we're really talking about things that don't have artifactual shape in the real world, that don't have 3 dimensions. But ideas can leave behaviors, can leave physical remains that can be identified on survey or on excavation. What I mean by ideas is the way sites are laid out, perhaps, the way a site is oriented, why we have rooms to the north, why we have kivas to the center, why we have trash mounds to the south, why we might have sets of rooms oriented in a certain way, whether people live in small hamlets and villages clustered around a large town or a large ritual center, or whether they live evenly spaced out depending on the nature of the farmland or the terrain that they live on. These things reflect different attitudes about the world they live in. This is what I mean by ideological, about the way they perceive their world and how they express worldview and their concepts of how the world should be organized and how people should relate to each other and relate to the forces that be.
As humans, we have a short perspective on things. We only live a short time. We only live a few decades. We only know, usually, the area that we grow up in or that we work in, live in. Yet we want to understand who we are, what we are, where we're going. I think that looking back in the past gives us an opportunity to see how people lived in these same areas where we are, only differently. That is, we can make a direct human connection with these people because we can see as we look at their at their structures and at their artifacts, that they're just as human as we are. We can walk into an Anasazi room with a hearth in it and immediately know that this is a place where a family like ours lived, with the same kinds of problems in many ways that our families have. We can see the art that they had as something that's immediately attractive to us. So we can recognize that common bond. We can reach out and make contact with them through studying them archaeologically. Yet we also can see that they lived a quite different life. They didn't have those huge subsidies of energy that we depend on, that we hope we'll keep. They didn't have the kind of national economy, national politics that we have. They lived in very different kinds of communities. So by comparing ourselves to people who lived in the same place, we can begin to get a perspective on who we are by seeing who we're not.
The more moments we can stand back from our own way of daily life, which impedes itself upon us so intensively, and the more we can look at people who came before, no matter whether they succeeded or failed, the better we're going to be able to see ourselves in some kind of perspective. I mean, it blows my mind, in a place that I dug one time, that 300 generations of people had been there with enormous continuity in way of life, without major upheavals for 300 generations. And we talk today about a generation of peace, as if it were a great accomplishment. When people come and look at that, they say, wait a minute, let's think about people living then and what their values were, and let's compare them to our values and try to figure out if there's anything that we can gain from them. That's in general why archaeology succeeds, right?